What if I told you that hundreds of studies with thousands of test subjects have proven that humans can alter the outcome of a dice roll by mental visualization alone? It's controversial, but the studies are convincing. And some studies have even shown that it's possible to affect the outcome of a random number generator. It's called Micro-psychokinesis, or micro-PK, and it's been scientifically studied way more than you might think. In fact, it's been proposed by academics far back in history, like famed French mathematician René Descartes. So, can you alter a dice roll and more with your mental intention? Find out now. René Descartes, the mathematician and philosopher known for his phrase, "I think, therefore I am," was more than a thinker, he was also an avid gambler. He was one of the premier scientific minds of the 17th century, and he came to the conclusion that a random gambling outcome could be positively influenced by gamblers who were in happy and positive moods, and vice versa. He believed this, and while it was just an observation on his part, he did gamble a lot. And of course, in modern times, that idea was turned into the movie The Cooler, where a gambler with terrible luck and a negative attitude is hired to just hang around other gamblers who are winning to bring down their mojo. It all goes well and good until the cooler falls in love and becomes happy, and his cooling powers stop working. It's just fiction, of course. But what about the actual studies? We need to go back to the 1930s at the Duke University Psychology Lab. Duke researcher Joseph Rhine set up an experiment with a pair of dice. He asked subjects to roll the dice and wish for a number higher than 7. The actual odds of rolling a number higher than a 7 are 41.7%. But when the test subjects rolled and wished for a number higher than a 7, it happened 46.1% of the time, about a 4.4% increase. This was over 562 different trials of 12 rolls each, or 6,744 rolls. This difference of 4.4% isn't just significant or highly significant. It's outrageously significant. It was so statistically significant that Rhine wondered, could it be perhaps the weight of the dots on the dice affecting how they landed? So he repeated the experiment, this time telling subjects to wish exactly for a 7. And he got similar results. So then he had subjects wish for a number lower than 7. And again, he got almost the same results. By 1943, Joseph Rhine at Duke had published 9 years' worth of studies. With each test, more stringent controls were added as peers and other researchers were skeptical. Rhine eliminated the human element, first by having the subjects roll the dice from a cup instead of rolling directly out of their hands. Same results. Then he devised a machine to roll the dice so that humans couldn't physically control them in any way. Similar results. Not only did the studies continue to show a significant micro-psychokinesis factor, but another fascinating effect emerged. When dividing the results of a test run into quarters, the first quarter always showed the biggest effect. In other words, the effect of wishing for the dice to do one thing or the other was much stronger at the beginning, but waned over time. It's like when your hopes and dreams are at their most potent. The researchers calculated that the chances of this kind of early spike happening by chance were 100 million to 1, and it came to be known as the quarter decline effect. Now, did anyone care about any of this? No. Some researchers pointed out potential flaws in a few of the earlier studies, like potential hand manipulation of the dice, etc., all of which had been ironed out by the time Rhine had finished his studies, but many were eager to simply say, well, it's been debunked, and moved on. Of course, as they say, extraordinary claims do require extraordinary evidence. But is this really an extraordinary claim? An extraordinary claim might be that cats are actually just tiny dogs. You'd have to really provide some extraordinary evidence of that to convince me, and especially to convince a cat. But this specific dice-throwing experiment had never been tested before in human history as far as anyone knows. So if everyone were really truly starting with an open mind, that it is equally possible or not possible to affect the outcome of dice, then should it really require extraordinary evidence, or just good solid evidence? The only reason you'd consider this an extraordinary claim is if you had already made the assumption that no human being can slightly change the outcome of a dice roll by a small percentage. The problem could be that micro-psychokinesis gets unscientifically lumped in with other so-called paranormal claims like telekinesis and precognition, which, whether real or not, don't quite have as much scientific evidence in their favor that micro-PK does. Some of Ryan's other parapsychology studies did just test straight-up ESP, or extrasensory perception, and these tests had less clear results. In one set of experiments, Ryan and the chair of the Duke Psychology Department, William McDougall, had subjects try to guess the symbol on the card being presented to them. They collected 2,400 guesses from their subjects, and while many subjects did not guess at a higher rate than what would be expected, a few did, and a smaller subset seemed to be very good at it, including one subject who successfully guessed an entire card deck, one after the other. From this, it seemed as though perhaps some people had or were more able to use this ability than others, which is interesting, but in the population at large, it was hard to find a measurable effect. But these studies were different from the dice studies because they did not involve the subject wishing or setting an intention on the outcome of the dice roll. It was more of a guessing game. The results seemed more, well, dicey than the dice. So now we cut ahead to the 1970s. In 1978, a Princeton University aerospace engineer named Robert John was intrigued by a student project which seemed to show that a random number generator, or RNG, could be manipulated by mental intention, micro-PK, to a statistically significant effect. John was so intrigued by the research that he founded PAIR, the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Laboratory. They conducted thousands of experiments. They even conducted some experiments with people thousands of miles away trying to influence the RNG machines. And to try something different than the RNG experiments, they developed a giant Plinko machine that dropped 9,000 balls over 300 plus pegs, expecting the standard bell curve distribution at the bottom. They told test subjects to try to get more balls to fall to one side, simply by directing their mental intention toward them. They found that subjects were able to mentally nudge the balls in one direction or the other, to a very small effect. Over time, the data for both the RNGs and the big physical ball-dropping machine showed a very, very small micro-PK effect. About 1 in 10,000 random numbers or metal balls could be mentally nudged higher or lower, depending on the test subject's intention. It's a very small effect, but here's the thing. The odds against that happening by chance across tens of thousands of trials are 1 trillion to 1. So, the effect is small with these experiments, very small, but it's absolutely there at 1 trillion to 1 odds against chance. To recap, so far we've got Princeton and Duke researchers who are adamant that micro-PK is real. Then in 1987, two researchers, Dean Radin and Roger Nelson from Princeton, did a meta-analysis of over 500 studies from over 60 researchers over the past 50-plus years. They found that the overall effect across all the studies was significant by 10 to the 25th power versus chance. And in 2000, they returned to the 1987 data and narrowed it down to include only the best, most stringently controlled studies. They even took multiple studies from groups like PAIR and pared them down into a single data point, so any one research group would not have more influence. And again, they found the same thing they'd found before, a 0.7% effect. Again, this may seem small, and yes it is, but it is nearly impossible to have this effect by chance across all those trials. Do these studies still have their detractors? They do. The scientific community at large has not embraced the notion of micro-PK. But consider this. The field of quantum physics has now revealed truths that 50 years ago would have been considered outrageous. Quantum entanglement has proven that two particles, like electrons, that are extremely far apart can somehow affect each other instantaneously, faster than the speed of light. You spin one electron of an electron pair, the other, across the universe even, begins spinning in the opposite direction instantaneously. Because it happens instantly, it totally defies Einstein's previous logic that the speed of light is the speed limit of the universe. Is the information actually traveling faster than the speed of light, or is some other kind of spooky, as Einstein called it, interaction happening? We aren't sure how it works yet, but we know it's true. So what does this have to do with the dice? Well, if quantum physics is saying that one thing can affect another instantaneously without any physical connection and at huge distances, could micro-PK be a related phenomenon? The detractors have a couple of main beefs with the meta-analysis done by Radin and his colleagues. They cite that number one, the effect is very small, which we've acknowledged is true, but still highly significant, and two, they say the studies included in the meta-analysis were homogeneous, or too similar. But really, isn't that kind of like saying, hey, I've proven that when you mix red and yellow together, you get orange. And we have 500 other studies showing the same thing. And having someone say, yeah, but all the studies just mixed yellow and red paint together. Too homogeneous. Let's take a look at one example of a study that claims to challenge the existence of micro-PK. In this study, a random number generator was devised that would randomly show either a happy picture or a very disturbing picture. The goal was to find out this: if the test subjects were in a positive frame of mind, would that cause more positive pictures to be shown to them? So the testers created a mantra or meditation to read to each test subject to put them in a, quote, relaxed and optimistic mood. The mantra went like this: leave all your thoughts and worries behind you. Breath slowly. We'll just hope that even though their paper says breath slowly, they actually told the subjects to breathe slowly. Anyway, this mantra goes on in an attempt to put the subjects in a positive frame of mind, and then the pictures were randomly shown to them, and guess what? It came out about 50-50, no effect. And from this, the researchers concluded that micro-psychokinesis is not real. I mean, where to start? Let me breath deeply here and just say that this study is missing a huge key element: intention. The subjects were not asked to wish or try to get nice photos. They were just supposed to get nice photos because they were in a happy mood from that breathing mantra. Is this really the same thing? Putting you in a good mood theoretically with a brief mantra and then testing to see if your positive mood randomly changes some pictures? I mean, it is a study of something. But is it what Descartes was talking about? Yes, he noticed that gamblers in a happy and positive mood got better outcomes. But those positive thinking gamblers had a very specific outcome in mind. It seems from Descartes to Rhine to John to Radin and all the researchers in between, we can infer that manifesting what you want to happen in any given situation requires two things: intention plus emotion. This is highlighted by Joe Dispenza in his book, You Are the Placebo, the interplay between intention and emotion. And on this, Dispenza and Descartes agree. The key, they say, is not just to intend for something to happen, but to believe it will happen wholeheartedly and to have a positive mindset about it. You must have a passion about it. This is what René Descartes believed and what the dice studies show, especially the early ones, which were less formal, involved actual dice and had subjects who were told to wish for an outcome. In other words, if you're at the craps table and you would like to roll a 9, but all you're doing is worrying about rolling a 7, you probably aren't getting at what Descartes and the researchers are saying. In fact, there's an old saying that goes, worrying is like wishing for the opposite of what you want. And couldn't that be micro-PK at work as well? Until quantum physics came along, everyone assumed that Isaac Newton's model of physics worked for everything. For 300 plus years, it has propelled a scientific revolution and brought us many of the amazing machines, medicines, and technology we have today. But now we know that while Newtonian physics works for things at a big level and regular-sized level and even a microscopic level, when you get lower than that, to the subatomic level, it all falls apart. That's where quantum mechanics is at work. These two models of science couldn't be more different. And despite decades of searching for a, quote, unifying theory of science, one that will account for both Newtonian physics and quantum mechanics, well, we can't find it. And so one has to wonder, given what quantum physics is showing us, are there some things that are true about our reality that maybe can't actually be measured by the tried and true, unbelievably effective scientific method itself? By putting dice-throwing subjects into a lab and asking them to try to nudge the outcome higher or lower, are we eliminating an element of intention and emotion that might be evident in a game where there are stakes on the line? And when we move from dice to the supposedly more scientific random number generators, does that paradoxically take us even further away from what we're actually trying to find? Is it even possible to test something like micro-psychokinesis in a lab setting? Are there certain things that simply cannot be accurately tested in a controlled, non-real-world lab setting? Is micro-psychokinesis, which by definition highly involves one's mental state, more accurately observed at something like a craps table? Here's the big question. With all the wrenches that quantum physics and entanglement and superposition and Schrödinger's cat and Heisenberg's uncertainty principle and on, are we entering an age where the scientific method itself, which we have relied on as the gold standard of human progress for centuries now, is not always going to be the best way to measure something that is not at the Newtonian or macro level, so to speak? Might we be entering a time where observation, like that of René Descartes, is actually more accurate than the scientific method for some areas of study? Maybe not even 1% of things, or 0.5% of things, or even 0.01%. But maybe for some things, the scientific method itself might mislead us. Let's end by going back to the beginning. If we look at the original dice experiments in the 1930s, we'll recall that Joseph Rhine's first experiments yielded a whopping 4.4% effect from subjects wishing for a certain number and rolling the dice by hand. As things got more controlled, we ended up with the 2003 meta-analysis, which sought out only the best studies which primarily used random number generators that still showed an incredibly significant 0.7% effect. So what's really happening here? If you're of the more skeptical mind, you might say, well, the original studies were flawed because they left the door open for human interference like hand manipulating the dice. And you might be right. But if you lean toward the other way of thinking, you might say, well, obviously, if you're testing something that relies on stakes and emotion, that's going to be tamped down in a sterile setting. Maybe the effect of micro-psychokinesis is magnified in a real-world setting, and we will never be able to confirm that in a lab. Either way you look at it could be right, but I'm willing to bet that those who think the first way are very beatable at Yahtzee. What do you think? Have you ever experienced a hard-to-believe run of dice rolls or coin flips or other positive outcomes? And do you think your mental state had anything to do with it? Let us know in the comments, and we'll see you next time on Wait What?